Hello YouTube, this is DVD Review Studios here, and today we shall be doing a different kind of video. This time around we shall be documenting every film I've watched thus far throughout the year 2022. It's an idea that I had towards the beginning of the year where I wanted to document every single movie I had watched throughout this year, and so I started a list on IMDb, which I'll put a link to that down below in the description, and you can check out my progress throughout the year if you are interested. But I thought this will be part one of a two-part video where I shall go through everything I've seen so far. My goal was originally to get to at least 52, obviously one movie per week of the year, but I think 60 is a more sort of fun, kind of approachable goal perhaps, so we'll see how this goes. I'll also be giving each film a star rating, which I don't usually rate films as such out of 5 or 10, but I'll put that in the bottom right hand corner per title that we go through in this video. So let's begin with the first film that I watched of 2022. First up is Shattered Glass, starring Hayden Christensen, which is a film that really did stick with me. I loved Christensen's performance as Stephen Glass, of which this film is based on a true story about an article writer who blatantly bends the truth, and when caught out for lying, he can't stop lying, which is an excellent storyline and something that I thought was very well represented on screen. And I really enjoyed the supporting performances as well, particularly from Hank Azaria as like a mentor type figure seen throughout the film who heavily influenced the good, shall we say, in Stephen Glass. And overall I found this to be a very fun representation of quite a conflicting character. The People vs. Larry Flynt was quite an eye-opening representation of the fight for freedom of speech, essentially, looking at the pornographic publisher Larry Flynt with this bizarre retelling of the events that supposedly took place behind the publishing of Hustler magazine, and I found this to be a very captivating performance from Woody Harrelson in particular, and I personally really enjoyed the trial scenes towards the end with Edward Norton. Next up we have Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome. Extremely disappointing film that feels like multiple stories kind of stitched together incoherently. I was a big fan of the opening bits. The Barter Town was a nice touch, along with the fighting arena with, I think it was Master Blaster if memory serves. Otherwise, the bits following Max's exile are just so tediously shit. I just didn't care for the group of child characters, or really the symbolism surrounding the plane and the Tomorrow Morrowland as they kept referring to. Just really wasn't a big fan, and overall a very deflating film coming off the magnificence of The Road Warrior. Although it is more of a TV movie, I felt it was worthy enough to include, and that is the finale movie, Daria, Is It College Yet? Which I absolutely adore this series, and overall the film was a fantastic farewell to the Daria show as a whole. Originally this began as a spin-off to Beavis and Butthead of all things, and the character really has come a long way in her own show. And the film I found to be overall very relatable about the struggles of graduation, wanting to sort of pick your path in life, and it really delivered on the conflicting side of sort of school life coming to an end, especially with various relationships sort of moving on with your future being sort of forced upon you in a way. And I just cannot recommend this show highly enough. It was a very moving conclusion and a very fitting one for the character of Daria Morgendorfer. Next up we have another animated feature. This is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, a stunning animated piece from Studio Ghibli preaching a message of peace in a post-apocalyptic world. And I honestly really loved the concepts behind the war on predatory insects, and how the title character tries everything she possibly can to prevent further conflict from breaking out amongst the human characters. And surprisingly, this was the first Ghibli film I'd actually ever seen, and it's definitely spurred me on to check out others in this series, so perhaps we'll see a few more of those appear on the list at a later date. Death to Smoochie, a very strange black comedy by Danny DeVito, where two children's TV presenters are at odds with one another to the point of sabotaging each other's careers. Very twisted film, of which I liked for Robin Williams' performance in particular, and Ed Norton being one of my favourite actors of all time was the initial reason why I decided to check out this film anyway, and it was honestly a very strange role for him looking at his previous acting work, but I liked what he had to offer, and the film is worth a watch in my eyes if you are interested in dark comedy in particular. Although I sadly don't own it on DVD or Blu-ray as of yet, I did go out and see the Last Jackass movie, or so we're led to believe it's the last one, since Johnny Knoxville seems to change his mind after every film at this point. But I saw this in the cinema with my brother, and watching it with a public audience was honestly fantastic. Some great reactions to arguably some of the most gnarliest stunts the crew has ever done. And I really like this film for the sort of bow out style it was going for, especially with bringing on new cast members. Favorite stunts, I particularly liked the Vomitron finale. Danger Aaron facing a bear had me creasing with laughter. I thought that was quite intense. And I really did like the idiocy behind the marching band skit, which resulted in some pretty brutal injuries. And sticking with the theme of Jackass with how much extra footage there was, this spawned another film, that being Jackass 4.5, which released onto Netflix. And I personally really like these kind of bonus movies where it provides a lot more kind of the behind the scenes sort of point of view for the thought processes behind certain stunts. Plus, there are some extra stunts, of which some are not so great in my honest opinion, hence why I guess they didn't make it into the final film. But that being said, there's a handful of stunts I really did enjoy in this film, especially the skydiving bit towards the end. Next up is a film that I did actually have in the collection. I sold it, however, a couple of weeks ago, and that is My Dinner with Andre, which was an interesting experience. I gave it a fairly low rating, where it honestly didn't really do much for me. It's a well acted film about conversation. Literally, the whole film is just two old friends talking for nearly 2 hours, and there are some interesting points of conversation to take away and appreciate. And I really liked how the characters were almost complete opposites. One is really optimistic and full of life, whereas the other is struggling to make ends meet with a more sort of realistic perspective on life in general. It's not really a film I'll probably ever watch again, but I'm glad to say I have seen it, and you can actually find it, to my knowledge, for free on YouTube still, so it may be worth having a look at or even listening to if you were inclined to take a look at the film in any way. Next up is Creed 2, which was not a bad sequel, but since watching it, I've found a lot of the Creed related stuff to be honestly really forgettable, which isn't a great sign for the title character. I was personally more interested in Rocky's minimal story throughout this film and the relationship he shares with the character of Ivan Drago from the fourth film. The scene in which Drago visits the restaurant that Rocky owns is one of the best in this film and definitely one of the most memorable and really a very emotional scene, especially where he's sat down looking at the walls, asking Rocky why there are no pictures of their fight from back in the day. And Rocky bluntly responds with, "There are no pictures of that," meaning he just wants to completely forget their interactions. Overall, a very interesting point to kind of raise so far into the franchise. And it's a film I will likely revisit in the future and does make for an interesting kind of contribution, more so in my eyes, to the Rocky franchise rather than just looking at Creed in particular. Another boxing film, Bleed for This, which I really liked a lot, felt very much like a Rocky wannabe kind of film, but I enjoyed it for the structure, which was overall very unique, with Miles Teller delivering a fantastic performance as a struggling boxer who wants to compete in the big leagues, only to suffer a spinal injury where he is told by medical professionals that he will never box again. And while healing, he starts training in secret with his coach, played by Aaron Eckhart. And I love this as a premise. For sure, a film I'd recommend with a lot of heart behind it, and overall a very interesting structure for the way this story is told. Next up is Three Colors Blue, which I feel I was a little harsh on my rating, but I'm going to stick by it until I see the rest of the Three Colors trilogy, of which I really did like this film, but I honestly failed to connect with the main character. We see a woman struggling with the loss of her husband, who was a composer, and their child, and she tries to sort of make new relationships, all while trying to feel some kind of emotion again, whilst attempting to complete her husband's final piece of musical work. Really great premise, and a film I will definitely revisit at some point. I'm looking forward to checking out the other films, White and Red, as soon as I can. But yeah, sadly, didn't really connect with this film as much as I perhaps wanted to do so. 8 Mile is a film I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would. Overall, a very inspiring story looking at the success of rap artist Eminem, only rather than sort of playing himself, it's an incarnation of him named Jimmy, or B Rabbit as he's referred throughout the film. Overall, I'm not a massive Eminem fan, but I loved the music throughout this film, where the film really was carried by a very humble performance. Overall, a very enjoyable film. Next up, we have El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie, which I did make a video review of this not too long ago, and it was honestly a lot of fun to rewatch the film and explore the bonus content on this Blu-ray set. Was the film in itself necessary? Definitely not. It's essentially just an added bonus, and in my eyes, a fair contribution to the Breaking Bad legacy. It's a heartfelt film made with good intentions, which I can appreciate, and overall, I'm glad with this film that they made it when they did. Otherwise, if they'd made this years down the line, it could have been an absolute disaster. But it was a smart conclusion for the beloved character of Jesse Pinkman, and I personally feel that this film does have a fair few things to offer, so if you're a fan of Breaking Bad and you haven't checked out this movie, I would definitely recommend doing so. Next up, we have another film which I sadly don't own as of yet, and that is The Batman, which I was pleasantly surprised mainly by the villain angle of this movie. This incarnation of the Riddler was a really great sort of modernized version of the character. Paul Dano did an incredible job at the portrayal. The only thing I'll say that I wasn't really a big fan of, and this is something that I see quite a lot of in sort of modernized DC films in particular, is I really hate how they kind of glorify the insane point of view of a villain. The scene in Arkham Asylum towards the end of this film was very well acted, but it seemed like such a low blow for the Riddler just to kind of flip out the way that he did when he's seen as very strategic throughout the majority of the film. Wasn't really a big fan of that. Seemed like a poor twist on a very creative version of this character. But otherwise, as far as the sort of typical hero story goes, I really like this movie. It was interesting to see it kind of build on the more detective story rather than this being a cliched origin story for Batman. Thankfully, that's already established in this film, and Patterson's Batman was an odd casting from the start, but I feel it really worked overall. I was actually really pleasantly surprised. He made for a great sort of Batman and Bruce Wayne combination, and the music throughout was really enjoyable as well, especially the Nirvana track used a couple of times that director Matt Reeves supposedly gained inspiration from when writing this movie. Definitely an interesting take on quite an iconic character. Next up is Doctor Strange, which is a rewatch for me, which I deliberately saw in preparation for the sequel. And I hadn't watched this film since the year it came out, and it holds up pretty well. Very well acted, and having seen the future for a lot of the characters that are involved in this story, such as Wong in particular, I did appreciate them a lot more. Story-wise, it's just another origin story in short, but I liked it for what it was. I will say that Mads Mikkelsen was a personal favourite part of this film, but his role as Caecilius was sadly very undersold in that he just didn't really have enough screen time, in my honest opinion, but perhaps less is more in that sort of instance. The fact that I want more is probably a good thing. And then, of course, we have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which I wasn't overly interested in this film, but the promises of certain cameos was something that did kind of intrigue me. Story-wise, I thought it was a little messy in comparison to the previous film. In short, we have Strange and Wong trying to save a teenager with the power of portaling across the multiverse from Scarlet Witch, who wants to harness this power for her own greed. And if I hadn't seen WandaVision and a couple of the other sort of animated Marvel shorts that were on Disney Plus, I would have been completely lost with this film. I really enjoyed Elizabeth Olsen as the main villain. She definitely gave a lot of heart to her role as Wanda, and trying to find a world where she can be happy with her fictional children. That was a really interesting concept where you do feel sorry for her but recognize her as a villain. And I also really enjoyed the cameo from Bruce Campbell, especially the end credits one, which really caught me off guard. From the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy, we have the rare editor's cut of Spider-Man 3, which was included in this Legacy Spider-Man Blu-ray box set. I did a video of this set on the channel if you want to check out my full thoughts on the alternate cuts of both Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3, but particularly looking at the editor's cut of Spider-Man 3, it was an interesting watch. I'd always wanted to see This rare version of the film, just to kind of note how it differed from the original and as to whether or not it really improved on the original. Personally, I think both films, if they were merged together, that would be a major improvement. The editor's cut I liked, but it wasn't really as interesting. I liked it about the same, if not slightly less. There are some enhancements which I think do, to an extent, improve the film. One scene that really did stick with me was the beautiful deleted scene of the sandcastle moment, which was a very empowering scene between Sandman and his daughter Penny. I'm so baffled that that scene was cut from the final film, where it's such an evocative moment. And I feel more moments like that, mainly with Sandman, mainly a sort of Sandman focus, would have been a better way to improve the film as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, overall, an interesting take on the movie, and definitely one I would recommend checking out if you are a fan of the Raimi trilogy. Her is a fascinating take on an unusual kind of relationship, with Joaquin Phoenix delivering an amazing performance as the character of Theodore, who is struggling with loneliness following quite a harsh breakup, and he suddenly becomes infatuated by this AI that calls itself Samantha, voiced by Scarlett Johansson, and he literally falls in love with this voice, where the more he explores the fantasy, the more he truly believes her to be a real person, only for the struggles to come forth and unfold where the AI tries to come to terms with not being a real person, and how the pair cannot coexist like a normal couple. And this was incredibly well directed from Spike Jonze, who directed one of my all-time favorite movies, being John Malkovich, both films of which I would highly recommend, a really unique love story. Groundhog Day is a film that I kind of struggled to get into at first. I didn't really connect with the main character, which by the end seemed to be kind of the point. The repetition of the same day occurring again and again for Bill Murray's character makes him appreciate his existence more, where he comes off at first as quite a selfish asshole. And with the film kind of simulating life being a pointless interval, it's a fantastic concept helmed by repetition, which I really loved. Mainly the comedic aspects of this movie. It's one that I will definitely revisit at a later date, and hopefully a film I will grow to appreciate a lot more. Another Bill Murray film, Lost in Translation, directed by Sofia Coppola. This movie really did surprise me. It's a very unique kind of sort of romance story, with Murray playing an actor for commercials who travels over to Japan, and he accidentally meets a young woman played by Scarlett Johansson, where they together explore the city of Tokyo in their free time, and unintentionally they get quite close, learning more about one another, with there being the looming sort of possibility of there being more to their relationship, which is what I really enjoyed about this film. It didn't really deliver on a cliched kind of completed story of a romance. It leaves you hanging in a way, almost wanting more, but in a satisfactory enough way where you're not sort of disillusioned or upset by what events occur throughout the film, especially the ending as well, which I feel would kind of frustrate a lot of viewers. But overall, I found this to be quite a solid watch. Definitely something that I do hope to revisit at some point in the near future. The Hurt Locker is a film I had seen many years ago, and I've had the urge for quite a while now to revisit it. And I'm glad that I did. This film really does hold up. I love the conflicting story of the character of William James, played by Jeremy Renner, being so good at his job, but incredibly difficult to work with, which made for a very entertaining story concept. And I loved Anthony Mackie in this film as well, where he was my personal favorite character that really stole most of the scenes he was involved with. And the representation of the Iraq War felt very gritty for this kind of cinematic experience. Definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen this movie. Go is a film that I stumbled across thanks to a soundtrack of all things, where a song by No Doubt came on my YouTube recommended playlist, and it had this movie poster as the album cover, and I'd never heard of this film, so I looked it up and it sounded like something I would really enjoy. And I did. I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. It's a fantastically delivered dark comedy with kind of a Pulp Fiction feel to it for the delivery side of things. Essentially, it's the same day's events told from different character points of views. My personal favorite being the Vegas trip, which was disastrous but obviously hilarious, with some really intense vehicle chases. Those were very entertaining throughout. And the dialogue was hilarious, and I really enjoyed the soundtrack for what it was, so this is a film that I would highly recommend. A couple of stand-up shows from one of my all-time favorite comedians, Ricky Gervais. We have the recently released Supernature, which I watched on Netflix, and I liked the show a lot. Definitely felt like a lot of the material was purposefully designed to offend, and the backlash that Ricky received only kind of goes to reinforce that point. And it was an excellent stand-up show where literally nobody is safe, but by that token, the material is inclusive enough to contain jokes about basically anyone or anything regardless. I mean, 5 minutes in and he'd already covered dead babies, trans rights, the Holocaust. He really doesn't hold back in the show, and that's personally why I really liked it. And having watched that one, I ended up rewatching afterwards the Humanity show from a couple of years previous. And it holds up pretty well. I personally really enjoyed the material relating to various Twitter debates he'd gotten into, and anything that he covers when it comes down to animals and animal rights is something that I do personally quite enjoy. And I'm hoping to add these shows to my DVD collection. I'll probably make a couple of customs to go with the pre-existing DVD sets I have for his first three stand-ups here and Science as well. Next up is Top Gun, a film that I had never seen before, and I picked this up in preparation to go out and go see the sequel, which, funnily enough, I never got round to, but I'm glad I did watch the original film. Cruise's character of Maverick was very exciting for the sort of rebellious attitude he puts forward, especially when showing off his sort of unbelievable skills. I really enjoyed Anthony Edwards as Goose. He was my favorite character, this sort of supportive kind of co-pilot seen throughout the film, and I really enjoyed the sort of struggles towards the end, especially with how Maverick tries to contain his emotions with a mistake that costs the life of a very close friend of his, that being quite a major sort of plot point, which really caught my interest. Overall, a great film. Next up, we have Jurassic World Dominion, which I feel I've been way too kind on this film's rating, but I honestly had a great time watching it just for all the wrong reasons. This was a stupidly entertaining film, almost in the realm of so bad it's good. My brother and I went to see this in the cinema, and a lot of the scenes just had us cracking up, sort of glancing at one another in pure disbelief as to what we were seeing. Especially the giant locust story, that was honestly a new level of Jurassic shite, almost reaching Jurassic Park 3 levels, and it was otherwise good to see the original cast back in action, and I did genuinely enjoy a lot of the new dinosaurs implemented into this film, but otherwise, it was just a very messy experience, and a lot of the times it just felt like two films were very sort of mushed together incoherently, which does seem to explain the runtime being nearly 2.5 hours. Overall, a pretty crazy viewing experience. Next up, we have South Park The Streaming Wars, which is the third of these sort of straight-to-streaming Paramount Plus movies. I really liked the COVID-related specials, and it felt like they were kind of thinking outside the box with those as TV movie content, but this one, however, was just okay. I liked how they were trying to satirize the oversaturation of streaming services. Ironically, this film being another contributing factor. Story-wise, however, this just felt to be really elongated with no payoff. And when the credits rolled, I literally just said aloud, "Wait, that's it?" Which, in another sense, is a good thing. Obviously, I was left wanting more, but I was just really underwhelmed by what I'd witnessed. The next part comes out mid-July, so I'm hoping there will be a worthwhile payoff. Oh, and Cartman has tits. Literally. Didn't see that one coming, so that's going to be an interesting one that they're going to have to resolve as well. Next up, we have Avatar, which is a film I am ashamed to say I had never actually seen before. Genuinely a fascinating visual experience, and although a very long film, the duration just flew by. Some really great ideas are introduced with this film, where mankind explore the alien world of Pandora, and the character of Jake Sully, portrayed by Sam Worthington, becomes swept up in the fantasy of pretending to be one of these alien creatures, to the point where he basically rejects his humanity and becomes in too deep. And I love this as a fantasy story. I really hope to see more of this kind of concept in the upcoming sequel. And last up for part one, we have Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe. And although this film had a similar premise to the first movie, where the pair misinterpret an offer from a beautiful woman, I really did find this movie very comical. Getting sent to space camp, the boys are led to believe that they will finally score because they're so good at performing a docking maneuver, when really they're just sort of simulating intercourse, and when they are sent into space, they mess up on the job that they are supposed to do, and the backlash leaves them drifting in space, only to enter a black hole transporting them to the year 2022. And seeing these 90s characters struggle with sort of the modern era was fantastic. Some really great comedy throughout. Some of it felt a little bit forced in my eyes, but otherwise, there were so many great moments to appreciate, especially the white privilege sequence that had me in hysterics, along with the entire prison scene. Overall, a very unexpected return where this film basically feels like it's setting up a new revival run of the show set in the modern era. So that's going to do it for the first part of looking at movies I've watched throughout the year 2022. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments if there are any titles I should pick up to feature in the next part of this video series. And so when you don't miss out on that second part, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, DVD Review Studios.
Are you threatening me?